America somehow built a food culture where people fear MSG but trust gas station sushi, think bread is poison unless it's $12, and believe all natural means anything. And honestly, that's just the appetizer. Things get much dumber from here. 1. MSG kicks things off with the kind of chaos usually reserved for horror movies, because Americans managed to turn a perfectly harmless seasoning into a biochemical boogeyman simply because someone once felt sleepy after eating lo mein and decided that must be science. Restaurants responded by slapping "No MSG" signs everywhere like they were fighting a garlic-resistant vampire. Parents started acting as if a sprinkle of umami could rearrange a child's DNA. And entire suburban dinner parties collapsed under the weight of one guest who believed MSG created mind control microchips. Meanwhile, every researcher studying the stuff kept pointing out that salt gives people more headaches, dehydration, and regret than MSG ever has. But the myth persisted, because nothing terrifies a certain demographic more than a three-letter acronym that sounds vaguely foreign. The cosmic punchline is that half the people demanding food without MSG are unknowingly devouring natural MSG in tomatoes, mushrooms, and Doritos, proving the real danger isn't the seasoning, it's the overwhelming confidence of the nutritionally misinformed. 2. The Twinkie immortality myth rises from grocery shelves every few years like a pastry-based zombie, fueled by people who genuinely believe this snack cake could survive nuclear winter, economic collapse, and possibly the fall of civilization. This myth grew legs thanks to a single decades-old classroom experiment where a teacher kept one on a shelf for show and tell, and it merely hardened into a fossilized sugar brick instead of dissolving into goo, which apparently was enough evidence for America to declare Twinkies an immortal species. In reality, the shelf life is only a few weeks, but good luck convincing anyone who has spent years telling friends that Twinkies will outlive cockroaches, Congress, and maybe the sun. The funniest part is that people repeat the myth with a strange sense of pride, as if preserving snack cakes until the apocalypse is a national achievement, when the truth is that Twinkies die like everything else. They just do it quietly, without the fanfare, drama, or radioactive glow the legend promised. 3. The brown egg equals healthier egg myth survives like an agricultural urban legend that refuses to retire, built on the bizarre assumption that darker colors magically contain more vitamins, antioxidants, or some morally superior energy. In truth, brown eggs come from brown hens, white eggs come from white hens, and that is the entire plot. Yet people keep acting like the shell color signals a mystical nutrient density bestowed by celestial farm spirits. Grocery stores lean into it by charging extra, letting consumers feel they've chosen the artisanal, spiritually aligned option instead of what it really is: chicken genetics. The cultural irony is that brown eggs used to be considered the cheap, low-status ones until marketing departments realized they could rebrand them for people who would pay more if something merely looked rustic. So the punchline is simple. The only thing richer about brown eggs is the premium people keep volunteering to pay for the privilege of believing poultry created a luxury line of breakfast products. 4. The microwave kills nutrients myth continues to sprint through American kitchens with the stamina of a conspiracy theory on a treadmill, despite decades of nutritionists waving charts and shouting that microwaving actually preserves more nutrients than boiling. Yes, the device people treat like a radioactive gremlin is often the healthiest cooking method in the room. But logic rarely stands a chance when someone believes a glowing box is vaporizing vitamins like a supervillain. So households keep reheating leftovers as if performing a dangerous ritual requiring whispered apologies to the ancestors. The myth persists because microwaves look suspiciously convenient, and Americans never trust a machine that makes life easier without demanding emotional sacrifice. Meanwhile, vegetables sacrificed to boiling water have lost more nutrients than a medieval village during plague season, yet no one blames the pot. The ironic twist is that microwaving is one of the few kitchen practices that actually protects nutrients, which means the real danger isn't the appliance. It's people defending bad science with the passion of someone trying to win a debate they started in 1987. 5. Frozen produce is inferior remains a national gospel preached by shoppers who believe the freezer aisle is where vitamins go to die. Never mind that frozen fruits and vegetables are often picked at peak ripeness, while their fresh cousins spend days traveling cross-country like exhausted hitchhikers losing nutrients by the mile. But because frozen food sits next to waffles shaped like cartoon characters, many assume it belongs to a lower nutritional caste, unworthy of the crunchy granola moral superiority bestowed upon a wilted bunch of overpriced kale. Americans act like freezing is culinary taxidermy, as if peas in a bag are haunted by the memory of flavor rather than perfectly intact. Grocery snobs love the myth because it lets them clutch baskets of sad, bruised strawberries and declare them superior merely by existing at room temperature. The real comedy is that frozen produce usually contains more vitamins, better texture retention, and fewer pesticides. But the myth helps people feel fancy, and nothing dies slower than a belief that flatters the shopper. 6. The myth that bread is inherently evil sweeps across the country every few years, transforming entire populations into amateur nutrition prophets who speak of carbohydrates the way medieval monks spoke of demons. Suddenly, every slice becomes a moral failing, a gluten-fueled curse, a carbohydrate apocalypse hiding in a toaster. Low-carb evangelists treat baguettes like malevolent entities plotting against their waistlines, blaming bread for everything from bloating to existential dread. Meanwhile, countries with bread-heavy diets continue functioning without collapsing into medical disasters, suggesting the baguette is not actually a biological weapon. The punchline is that the average demonized American loaf isn't even high quality. People are panicking over sandwich bread so processed it barely qualifies as a grain product, yet blaming bread as a concept rather than the industrial foam masquerading as nutrition. It's not the ancient villain people imagine, but the myth persists because it's easier to condemn an entire food group than acknowledge portion sizes or decades of chaotic snacking decisions. 7. Red meat color equals freshness is the kind of myth that thrives because grocery stores have spent decades training consumers to trust vibrant hues over actual science. Shoppers see a bright cherry red steak and assume it was raised by angels and delivered by unicorns, while anything slightly brown is declared unfit for human consumption. In reality, the color shift is just oxygen interacting with myoglobin. But many Americans behave as if duller meat has entered the witness protection program and is lying about its past. Stores exploit the myth with packaging technologies that keep meat artificially red long after its enthusiasm for living has faded. The funniest part is people proudly rejecting perfectly good cuts because they don't match the shade they saw in a fast food commercial, proving that when it comes to meat selection, chemistry loses every battle against the powerful marketing force known as looks fresh enough that I don't have to think about science today. 8. The idea that organic food is universally healthier spreads through grocery aisles like a halo effect with a credit card surcharge, convincing shoppers that pesticides vanish, calories transform, and nutrition blossoms simply because a label says organic, ignoring the inconvenient truth that organic farms also use pesticides, just different ones. Many Americans treat the organic sticker as a magical seal of moral purity, a kind of edible sainthood. The myth survives because it makes people feel virtuous, even when buying organic cookies loaded with the same sugar as their non-organic cousins, proving moral superiority apparently tastes delicious. The punchline is that organic food can be great, but it is not a cheat code for health, longevity, or environmental sainthood. Yet Americans continue treating the label as if it guarantees a cosmic blessing, unaware they're often paying more for produce that tastes the same because nothing sells quite like the promise that a carrot was raised in a spiritually enlightened environment. 9. The myth that anything labeled natural must be healthy is one of America's greatest linguistic achievements, transforming a legally meaningless adjective into a dietary moral compass powerful enough to override logic. Shoppers grab natural snacks with the confidence of people making life-enhancing choices, unaware the term legally applies to things with ingredients processed enough to make a chemistry teacher sweat. Companies slap the word on granola bars, chips, sodas, and anything else that needs a quick reputation boost, exploiting a collective fantasy that nature herself blessed these snacks with wholesome virtue. The real comedy is that arsenic is natural, rattlesnake venom is natural, and tornadoes are natural, yet people continue acting like the word guarantees purity. The myth persists because natural feels soothing and vaguely pastoral, and Americans adore any label that lets them eat sugar with a sense of righteousness, proving nothing sells quite like the promise that nature handcrafted your junk food. 10. The myth that salt substitutes are automatically healthier spreads with the enthusiasm of a wellness trend looking for a personality, convincing people to replace one mineral with another as if performing dietary alchemy. Potassium-based substitutes get treated like enlightened alternatives, despite the fact that too much potassium can cause real medical problems, particularly for anyone with kidney issues. But nuance rarely survives in a culture that loves binary thinking. Salt bad, substitute good. Meanwhile, many of the same people terrified of sodium are happily consuming fast food meals containing enough salt to preserve a medieval castle, but feel morally redeemed because the shaker on their dining table contains something healthier. The punchline is that regular salt is fine in normal amounts, substitutes aren't miracle workers, and the human body does not respond to sodium the way fear-based marketing suggests. Yet the myth lingers because no one wants to admit the real threat isn't salt. It's the portion sizes that could brine a small boar. 11. The belief that sugar causes hyperactivity in kids bursts forth at every birthday party like a panicked prophecy, convincing adults that frosting transforms children into caffeinated gremlins. Despite decades of research showing no actual link, parents cling to the myth because nothing explains chaotic childhood behavior quite like blaming cake instead of the natural energy of small humans trapped indoors with balloons. The myth thrives because it provides a convenient villain. Sugar is easy to accuse, never hires a lawyer, and cannot testify. So adults watch kids sprint around screaming and assume the cupcakes triggered it, ignoring the environment, gifts, overstimulation, and the intoxicating thrill of temporary lawlessness. Scientific studies repeatedly show no measurable sugar-induced hyperactivity, but parents continue reciting the myth with total confidence, proving that the real fuel behind childhood chaos isn't sucrose. It's the unfiltered freedom children experience when adults temporarily surrender their authority in favor of party photos. 12. The rinsing raw chicken myth survives like a culinary superstition passed down from ancestors who believed water had magical germ-erasing powers. Kitchens all over America host scenes where people proudly wash raw poultry, sending microscopic bacteria flying across countertops, utensils, and innocent bystanders like a biological sprinkler system. Food safety experts have begged for years for this practice to stop, explaining that cooking kills bacteria, not giving the chicken a spa day under the faucet. Yet the myth persists because it feels morally correct, as if cleanliness can be achieved through ritualistic rinsing. The irony is that the washing process dramatically increases contamination risks, turning sinks into microbial slip and slides. But people cling to the habit with fierce loyalty, confident that running water is the culinary equivalent of holy purification. The comedic twist is that the safest chickens are the ones left alone. No rinsing, no baptism, just cooked properly. But logic rarely stands a chance against tradition backed by stubborn confidence. 13. Sea salt is healthier than table salt, floats around grocery stores with the serenity of a wellness mantra, convincing shoppers that proximity to the ocean imbues sodium chloride with metaphysical benefits. Yes, sea salt has trace minerals, but in amounts so small they might as well be measured with a microscope during a power outage. Meanwhile, people loudly reject table salt as if it personally betrayed them, even though the body processes both exactly the same way. The myth survives because sea salt sounds artisanal and expensive, and Americans love any seasoning that promises spiritual uplift alongside hypertension. Marketing teams push the narrative with elegant packaging, letting customers imagine fishermen hand-harvesting flakes under moonlight rather than shoveling crystals out of large-scale evaporation ponds. The comedy is that for health purposes they're indistinguishable, yet the myth thrives because believing in it allows shoppers to add sodium to everything with a sense of enlightened superiority. 14. The myth that fat-free equals healthy has haunted the nation since the 90s, a decade when Americans enthusiastically removed fat from food and replaced it with sugar, thickeners, and spiritual hopelessness. Shelves filled with fat-free cookies, fat-free yogurt, fat-free cheese products that tasted like sadness compressed into snack form. Yet consumers devoured them with righteous determination, convinced they were outsmarting biology. The myth persists because fat sounds scary, while fat-free sounds like freedom. Even though dietary fat is essential, and many fat-free products contain more calories and carbohydrates than the originals, Watching people triumphantly purchase fat-free salad dressing is like witnessing a nutritional plot twist where the hero accidentally chooses the villain. The darkly comic truth is that chasing fat-free foods often leads to worse health outcomes. But the myth endures because America spent decades investing in the idea, and nothing clings to life quite like a marketing lie with nostalgic momentum. 15. The idea that spicy food causes ulcers continues to scorch medical logic with the persistence of a ghost pepper, even though ulcers are caused by bacteria or certain medications, not jalapenos staging a hostile takeover of the stomach. Yet plenty of Americans insist heat equals harm, treating chili peppers like biological weapons instead of flavor enhancers. Restaurants cater to the myth by warning guests about upset stomachs, while the real scientific culprit, H. pylori, lives its quiet, microscopic life without the drama. The myth sticks around because spice delivers a physical sensation people can blame, and blaming sensations is easier than accepting bacterial reality. Meanwhile, cultures that eat blisteringly spicy food daily seem to function without collapsing from ulcer epidemics. But that evidence gets ignored because myths rarely surrender to international perspective. The punchline is simple: spice doesn't cause ulcers, misinformation does, but humans will always choose the explanation that sounds painful enough to feel morally satisfying. 16. Watching people treat detox diets as medical truth is like watching someone try to reboot their liver with the same confidence they use to restart a frozen laptop. Because Americans insist that drinking neon green juice for 3 days somehow flushes out mysterious toxins, a word no one can define but everyone fears. Meanwhile, actual doctors have tried explaining that the liver and kidneys already detox the body, but the message gets drowned out by influencers blending celery like it contains the secrets of immortality. The myth survives because suffering through expensive misery makes people feel spiritually cleansed, even if the only thing leaving their bodies is money and electrolytes. And the punchline is that these regimes don't detox anything except your schedule and your patience, leaving participants proudly announcing they feel lighter when what they really are is dehydrated, underfed, and deeply committed to a belief system invented by someone who thinks chlorophyll is personality. 17. The idea that calories don't count if the food is healthy floats through American consciousness with the gentle confidence of a lie repeated often enough to feel like wisdom, leading to magical arithmetic where quinoa bowls eaten with moral righteousness somehow bypass basic biology. People love believing avocado consumption places them in a parallel nutritional universe where energy doesn't accumulate, as if the body pauses calorie tracking whenever the food looks Instagram approved. This myth thrives thanks to wellness culture, which convinced everyone that eating clean is a spiritual discipline with loopholes, not a set of metabolic processes that simply do not care about your moral purity. Watching someone tally their calories for a cheeseburger but refuse to do the same for almond butter is like watching a magician argue with physics. And the final joke is that the healthiest foods can contain massive calories. But the myth persists because admitting this would require people to acknowledge that portion control exists, and that ruins the fantasy faster than reading nutrition labels. 18. The belief that carrots dramatically improve eyesight is a wartime propaganda relic that somehow evolved into a permanent dietary law, convincing generations of Americans that a root vegetable grants night vision powers like some orange-tinted superhero serum. The myth stuck because parents love any excuse to make kids eat vegetables, and carrots were given the kind of magical reputation usually reserved for enchanted artifacts. Meanwhile, scientists continue repeating that carrots help maintain vision, not upgrade it to military grade, yet the legend refuses to die, suggesting humans would rather believe in vegetable-based superpowers than accept mundane nutritional facts. Grocery stores still benefit as people shovel bags of carrots into carts like they're prepping for a blackout. The real punchline is that the only proven way carrots dramatically improve eyesight is by moving them out of your refrigerator, giving you something bright to stare at while realizing the myth has been fueling the supplement industry for decades without delivering a single owl-like ability. 19. The myth that cracking your knuckles causes arthritis lingers in households like an inherited curse, usually delivered by relatives who discovered one piece of folklore in 1972 and never updated their internal software. Knuckle crackers everywhere get scolded as if they're detonating tiny bone grenades, even though decades of research have shown no connection between the habit and arthritis. But science rarely stands a chance against a myth that produces such satisfying moral indignation. People love believing the sound is bones grinding when it's just gas bubbles popping, a fact they refuse to accept because it ruins the drama. Parents warn kids with the same tone they'd use for announcing a bear attack, transforming a harmless habit into a medical apocalypse. The comedy is that the only long-term consequence of knuckle cracking is annoying the people who think they're guardians of joint safety, proving the real ailment here isn't arthritis, it's generational stubbornness. 20. The myth that late-night eating automatically causes weight gain marches on like a bedtime curfew enforced by imaginary nutrition police, convincing Americans that the digestive system keeps strict office hours and refuses to process food after 8 p.m., unless bribed. People cling to the idea that calories consumed in darkness turn into fat faster, as though nighttime activates a secret metabolic sabotage mode. Diet culture pushed the myth hard because it's simple, dramatic, and easy to enforce, even if it ignores the boring truth that total calories and activity matter far more than the hour displayed on your microwave. Watching people panic because they ate a cookie at 9:03 feels like observing members of a cult terrified of angering the ancient god of snacking. In reality, eating late only matters if it causes overeating or sleep disruption, but acknowledging nuance isn't nearly as exciting as believing your stomach turns into a vindictive gremlin after sunset. 21. The belief that gluten is dangerous for everyone spread across America with the enthusiasm of a fad diet looking for a personality, despite the scientific reality that only a small percentage of people have celiac disease or genuine intolerance. Yet entire social circles adopted gluten-free living with missionary zeal, convinced that wheat was plotting against them at a cellular level. Grocery stores capitalized immediately, producing gluten-free versions of foods that never contained gluten to begin with, all to satisfy shoppers who believed gluten operated like nutritional dark magic. The myth survives because blaming gluten for bloating is easier than admitting to last night's festival of stress eating. Meanwhile, cultures that consume bread daily continue thriving without collapsing into gluten-induced despair. But this evidence tends to be ignored in favor of dramatic storytelling. The punchline is that gluten is harmless for most people, but the myth persists because eliminating a single protein feels like a heroic act in a world where actual dietary discipline is much harder. 22. The idea that if food is labeled low sodium, it must be healthy, thrives in grocery aisles full of people who assume removing salt magically transforms heavily processed meals into nutritional saints. Manufacturers love the myth because they can reduce sodium slightly, add sugar or artificial flavorings to compensate, and still charge more for a label that implies virtue. Shoppers proudly pick up low-sodium canned soups containing enough preservatives to outlast a natural disaster, convinced they've made a life-affirming choice. Meanwhile, dietitians keep pointing out that sodium is not the villain. Excessive processed foods are. But Americans cling to the myth because it provides a simple rule to follow in a food landscape with too many variables. The cosmic joke is that low-sodium versions can be worse tasting, more expensive, and not significantly healthier. Yet the myth marches on because people believe any food becomes morally better the moment a corporation removes a pinch of salt. 23. The myth that breakfast is the most important meal of the day gained immortality thanks to early 20th century marketing teams who realized they could boost cereal sales if they convinced Americans that skipping breakfast was a crime against their physiology. Suddenly, the nation believed their metabolism would collapse without immediate morning granola, and childhood became an era of being force-fed bowl after bowl of sugar disguised as whole grains. Medical science later clarified that breakfast is optional and varies by individual needs, but the myth persists because it makes people feel structured and righteous, even if all they're eating is a dessert marketed as health food. Watching grown adults panic over missing breakfast is like watching someone insist their phone battery will explode if they don't charge it at exactly 7 a.m. In reality, the body handles flexible eating just fine, but the myth remains profitable, and nothing survives longer in America than a lie that sells well with milk. 24. The belief that multivitamins are essential for everyone stays alive thanks to a billion-dollar supplement industry and generations convinced that swallowing a daily pill is the nutritional equivalent of installing software updates. People treat multivitamins like a safety blanket that prevents every conceivable deficiency, despite studies showing limited benefits for most healthy adults. The myth exists because popping a pill is easier than eating vegetables, and humans adore shortcuts that let them feel responsible without actually changing behavior. Pharmacies dedicate entire walls to these bottles, each promising energy, immunity, vitality, and the quiet comfort of believing you're taking control of your health. The irony is that many people consuming multivitamins are already nutritionally adequate, meaning the pills provide nothing but expensive peace of mind. Yet the myth persists because no one wants to admit they've spent years buying colorful candy marketed as life insurance for their bloodstream. 25. The myth that fresh herbs are always better than dried thrives in kitchens where people worship the idea of culinary purity, convinced dried oregano is somehow a fallen angel of the spice rack. TV cooking shows didn't help. Every celebrity chef waves fresh sprigs around like they're conducting a symphony of flavor, creating a myth that dried herbs are second-class citizens. In reality, dried herbs often contain stronger, more concentrated flavors and last longer without turning into wilted botanical disappointments. But logic rarely wins against aesthetics, and Americans love choosing ingredients based on how photogenic they look on a cutting board. So, home cooks dismiss dried herbs with moral superiority, unaware that most restaurant dishes use dried versions for consistency and cost. The punchline is that both forms have their place, but the myth persists because people love feeling fancy, and nothing screams sophistication like paying extra for something that will die in your fridge 3 days later. 26. The belief that white meat is always healthier than dark meat spread through American households with the solemnity of nutritional scripture, convincing generations that choosing chicken breast over thighs was the difference between sainthood and dietary failure. The myth stuck because white meat has slightly less fat, a distinction people exaggerated into a dramatic warning. Like dark meat was secretly plotting cardiovascular sabotage. Meanwhile, dark meat contains more nutrients and tends to be far more satisfying, which ironically can reduce overeating, a nuance trampled by decades of moral panic. Watching someone chew through a dry, flavorless chicken breast purely out of duty feels like witnessing a culinary punishment ritual. But the myth persists because it aligns perfectly with America's obsession with purity, self-denial, and bland food disguised as discipline. The comedy is that dark meat isn't unhealthy, it's just been slandered by a nation terrified of enjoying dinner. 27. The myth that non-dairy alternatives are automatically healthier delights marketing executives everywhere, allowing brands to sell nut juices, grain liquids, and plant emulsions as cleaner, purer, and morally superior to milk. People happily adopt them without reading the labels, unaware many contain more sugar, thickeners, and additives than the dairy they're replacing. Oat milk alone has become a cultural icon, treated like the beverage equivalent of enlightenment, despite often delivering a caloric punch disguised by its eco-friendly charm. The myth thrives because non-dairy options align with identity and aesthetics, and Americans love consuming virtue along with their lattes. Yet the punchline remains the same. Some non-dairy milks are great, some are nutritional chaos, and most are chosen not for health but for vibes. But the myth persists because admitting you switched for flavor rather than health requires honesty, and humans prefer packaging claims to introspection. 28. The idea that meal prepping guarantees healthy eating wanders through social media like a motivational ghost, whispering promises of discipline, transformation, and neatly stacked Tupperware. People believe that buying 20 identical containers and filling them with carefully weighed ingredients will magically override stress, cravings, and the basic human desire for variety. The myth thrives because prepping feels productive, and Americans worship productivity even when it leads to meals that taste like microwaved resignation by Thursday. Real obstacles like appetite changes and surprise cravings are conveniently ignored, replaced with the fantasy that routine is stronger than biology. The comedic twist is that meal prepping works for some, but is not a universal cure for dietary chaos. Yet people cling to the myth because it's easier to buy containers than examine habits. In the end, the only guaranteed outcome is a fridge full of food you once loved but now resent. 29. The myth that fruit juice is healthy because it's natural allows Americans to drink liquid sugar with the confidence of someone performing a righteous act, forgetting that fruit stripped of fiber becomes a glucose express train. Juice companies love the myth, marketing their bottles like medicinal potions bursting with vitality, conveniently omitting the part where a single glass can match the sugar content of soda. Parents pour it into lunchboxes, believing they're nurturing their children with nature's nectar, unaware they're delivering a metabolic plot twist. The myth persists because juice looks wholesome, tastes delightful, and lets people pretend they're consuming fruit even though they're really consuming a candy bar in liquid form. The punchline is that whole fruit is healthy, juice is dessert, and the only thing natural about it is the speed with which it raises blood sugar. 30. The belief that all fats are bad continues haunting American nutrition culture with the persistence of a ghost that refuses therapy, leaving people terrified of avocados while happily consuming mountain-sized portions of low-fat snacks. This myth dates back to decades of misguided dietary guidelines and food industry panic, which convinced an entire nation that fat was a villain lurking in every meal. The irony is that healthy fats support brain function, hormones, and long-term health, but nuance never stood a chance against sensational headlines. Meanwhile, people proudly avoid olive oil while inhaling fat-free frozen yogurt, topped with enough sugar to anesthetize a small horse. This myth sticks because declaring one nutrient evil is easier than facing complex dietary reality, and Americans love moralizing their meals. The comedy is that eliminating all fats often makes diets worse, but the myth lives on because fear is easier to sell than balance. 31. The myth that healthy food is automatically expensive thrives because it allows people to blame their wallets instead of their habits, insisting that good nutrition hides exclusively in upscale organic markets guarded by kombucha-drinking gatekeepers. Meanwhile, basic staples like beans, rice, frozen vegetables, oats, eggs, and whole grains remain some of the cheapest foods available. But acknowledging this would ruin the narrative. The myth survives because the wellness industry aggressively markets health as a luxury lifestyle, accessible only through $12 smoothies and boutique supplements. People internalize the message and repeat it with religious certainty, ignoring every affordable option sitting quietly on supermarket shelves. The punchline is that healthy eating can be cheap, but blaming cost is more comfortable than admitting convenience, preference, and marketing influence most food choices. In the end, the myth persists because it provides the perfect excuse, wrapped neatly in economic tragedy and sprinkled with denial. And that's the grand tour of America's nutritional delusions. Pick the dumbest one in the comments, argue about it loudly, and yes, hit subscribe before the next wave of nonsense arrives.